Can't tell. There it is. It's live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our weekly podcast called the Game Audio Hour, where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas, the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And we have on our panel this week, we got Vince Diamante. How you doing, Vince?
I'm doing pretty good. A hell of a lot better than I was last week after that food poisoning.
Man, I didn't know why you were out. That was it, food poisoning, huh?
I was out, and a lot of food was out as well. Nothing wanted to stay in me that day. It was very fun.
That's a good start to the show. Did you turn green? I've heard people with food poisoning will turn, have a green pallor to their skin.
Apparently I was just looking a little bit pale, but I didn't really notice any other color besides that. But yeah, I'm a lot better this week. I'm glad to be on.
Good. I'm glad you're back. What caused it, do you know?
Some bad yakitori, I think.
It's in the name. It's called yakitori.
Right. Now that it was actually really good, but I think there was one kicker. I think it was those scallops that I had.
Oh yeah, those will get you.
Yeah, the chicken, the beef, that was all great, and then maybe those scallops. Oh well.
Well, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're better, and don't hate scallops, man. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, seriously. Thanks.
Say hi to Alex in Japan. What's going on, Alex?
Hi, I'm all right. I've got the kids at home today, so I'm going to be riding the mute button like I ride faders, because you know I ride faders.
Yeah. So we should slowly hear you go out of mute. Then, are you like a fast fader guy? Are you talking 6mm, 10mm? What are you talking?
I'm talking press button mute right here.
No problem, man. Well, thanks for being on. And joining us today is Ian Stocker. I'm glad to have you back, Ian.
How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Broadcasting out of San Francisco, out of the home studio.
Yes, Emeryville to be precise.
Oh,
San Francisco Bay Area, aka IKEAville.
Well, today we're talking about a couple topics, but we might not get to number 2, so I'm just not going to announce it, just in case. So number 1, though, is a link that I am going to share in the chat as well, and it is the 14 pieces of software that shaped modern music, and basically it's a history of DAWs. It goes back as far as, I got to hit a bunch of buttons because I was already forward. It goes back as far as what looks like 85 with Performer, and just 89 with Octamed. There's a bunch in here. So I just wanted to touch on each one with you guys and get your thoughts on them. And also, again, I'm going to share this link in the chat right now, and I'll share it in the show notes at the end of the show. So what was your guys, let's start with that. What was your first DAW experience? What were you using, and what year was it? And what kind of computer were you on?
Wow. So, the first thing that's listed on the website is Performer, and actually that was my first real serious thing. Obviously not in 1985, but in the late 90s when I was in school. I was messing with MIDI first with DP 3.1, back when Macs were in OS 9, I think. Yeah, I think it was 9.2 at that time, and I had a whole lot of fun with that. And I was not really a Mac guy at the time, so I was looking for alternatives on PC, and I tried out stuff like Cubase and Cakewalk, and I stuck with Cakewalk eventually. But for a long time, I really had a fondness for Digital Performer.
That's awesome. I didn't use DP. Did you use DP, Ian?
I did not. Actually, yeah, there's only a handful of things on here that I have had time with. My first DAW was Logic. I think I used Logic 5 or something like that, whatever they had around 1998. And I actually only wrote a couple pieces of music with it. I kind of would do battle with it and try and learn it for an afternoon, and then retreat defeated, and then a week later try again. And I did that 8 or 9 times before eventually just being screw it, I'm going to stick with cracking. And I kind of have avoided MIDI ever since, with the exception of maybe Ableton.
That was the days of eMagic, wasn't it? Isn't that who had it?
Those Germans. Yeah.
Yes, eMagic.
Yeah, I had their Unitor 8 too, which I thought was an amazing piece of hardware, which was their MIDI patch bay, basically, right? Wasn't that called the Unitor 8?
It sounds familiar. The only piece of hardware I had from them was the dongle that you had to plug into your serial port in order to run Logic.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The dongle back in the day. I hate dongles. I did a Cubase session today. A week and last week I finished it up. I guess it took a week, and yeah, I had to make sure that I had the newest awesomeness. Oh, so annoying. So Alex, what's your earliest DAW?
Well, I guess if you're counting the trackers in there as well, then it would probably be Noise Tracker. Noise Tracker on the Amiga was probably was my first, but that of course didn't do MIDI. The very first one that did MIDI that I used was one on the Amiga called Music X, and I have prepared a convenient screenshot because I'm not sure that many people would actually know Music X. This is actually a really can you see that?
Not yet.
Groovy.
Can you see that?
What is
I
it?
see it now. I'm locking
Okay.
you in. There it is.
Okay, so
Cool.
this is Music X on the Amiga, and it was actually it was a very early. It was kind of like a Cubase clone, in that you had all these horizontal bars that represent chunks of musical data. But what was really interesting in Music X is that each one of these bars could actually contain other bars. So what you could do is you could nest music data inside itself. So your whole song would be one of these like clips, as we would know it in a modern arrange view. Inside a clip, you could just have other clips, and inside those clips, you could have other clips, and you keep going down and down and down. And there was you could have notes together with clips, just like in the screenshot. So it was quite ahead of its. Yeah, it's quite ahead of its time, and I think there's even if there's anybody out there who's interested in making a DAW to be competitive today, I think this concept still has a lot of promise in it. All of that, you got sort of modulation data, note data, you can see a program change, and all of these other discrete musical clips all in the one clip.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I could imagine that at high res. Like, you could do so much with getting kind of thumbnails of the contents of the, the strips with strips inside of them. It's kind of like in programming, one of the few computer science terms I know is component object model, where you've got like a thing that can contain a collection of things just like it down into infinity.
I think I guess Reaper took a similar approach when they decided to have no difference between MIDI clips and audio clips. In this case, of course, there's no audio because it was before DAWs could do that. But it was being that you could have note data, any kind of data inside a clip, including other clips. So just brilliant. So there you go. That was my first DAW after Noise Tracker.
Nice. So I think my first DAW, and I don't even know if it counts. I was sitting here doing research while you're talking. Do you guys remember the Synclavier?
Oh well, I guess there was a sequencer in there, so.
Yeah, I mean, does that count? Because that was the earliest exposure I had to kind of using software to make music.
I think that counts.
I had a Roland G303. Do you guys remember that? It was a guitar. It had this giant cable that plugged into the back of it. It was like, it had one of those like, what's the word I'm looking for? It was, they use them on the back of ADATs. There's a term for you. But anyway, it's a giant block that you would screw into it, back of an ADAT, and it basically has a channel, a physical channel for every parameter in an ADAT. I can't think of what they're called right now. Anyway, so it had its version of one of those. You plugged it into this guitar. You plugged it into your Synclavier. And I always called it Synclavier. Some people called it Synclavier. I don't know which is proper terminology.
I think Synclavier sounds far more classy.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Classy is good.
Oh, Synclavier. So, yeah, that was my first experience on, like, first of all, correcting notes. that was really awesome because I'm super sloppy, and so I would play on guitar, and then I could go in there and I could go, oh, nope, this all needs to be fixed. But then when I was in college, because it was a while ago, I graduated in '89. We were learning. Everything was analog. We dealt with boards and tape machines and all that stuff. And so ADAT came out and was really pushing through certain specific college campuses. And I've talked about this on a previous show. To this day, I have a blackface ADAT that they gave to students where I went to school. And so that was my first introduction to digital recording. so what we were doing in our classes, we would kind of like take the synclavier and go out to ADAT. So we would have this like, that was our idea of a digital environment, is that you could record and use synclavier, make corrections, push it through to tape, if I remember correctly, because this was a long time ago. And then we had a digital recording of a digital experience on an analog instrument. So that was kind of the combination back then. But true DAW, my first DAW was, and I think it's in the list, it's whatever Cubase was before it was Cubase. That's there? I can never remember what they called it. I gotta get to the list.
Wasn't it always Cubase though?
No, it had a different name, like MIDI 16. It had a number in the name. I'm trying to find it really quickly so I don't have a bunch of dead air. Cubase, it was called...
Well, that's interesting. I thought it was always...
MIDI Sequencer Pro 16 on the Commodore 64.
Wow. It started on the Commodore 64, did it?
Yeah. And it was just a joke. I was playing, actually, Gold Box games on my 64, and a friend of mine said, hey, they got this new... He had this, like, diskette. Drop it in, close the door, snap, to run the diskette. And he's like, you can make music in MIDI, you do MIDI, and I'm like, what is MIDI, you know? And because I'm all analog, I'm like, this is amazing. To this day, I'm still kind of flabbergasted by MIDI, and that's kind of embarrassing to say.
I'm kind of flabbergasted that you were doing MIDI on a Commodore 64, honestly.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that it'd be able to handle it.
The earliest one you said was the Commodore Amiga, right? I mean, that was just one. What, you had the 64, the 128, and then the Amiga, right?
Yeah,
did the 64 require some kind of I guess there would have been some kind of MIDI interface with one in, one out kind of thing that you plug into that?
Yeah, it plugged into the back of the Commodore 64. I still have it. It's got, again, one of those giant, like, printer, like it takes two hands to plug it into the back of your computer.
Wow.
It's just the size of the computer itself.
Yeah.
The MIDI.
Yeah, you need a friend to help lift it. You know, that kind of connection.
Separate power supply.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if the younger producers these days, I don't mean to sort of be condescending or anything, but you know, the whole nebulous concept of MIDI through, you know, you wonder how many people really understand that. I can't even remember myself. I remember the day when I finally got my head around MIDI through.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
MIDI through is fantastic. Well, when I was in school, I had a teacher that was really insistent on getting us to understand everything. So he actually MIDI through'd just MIDI from a controller keyboard through something like 20 different romplers and modules and samplers and whatnot, just to show the possible latency that will happen with excessive MIDI through usage. And
it was like 1.5 seconds.
It was a fantastic sound that was had in that room beyond just exhibiting the point he was trying to make. It was very cool.
Yeah, I always wondered why, you know, it's like, wow, MIDI through, this is great, but why would you ever want more than one MIDI out if you've got MIDI through? That's only because I had only three, one sampler and two keyboards, not 20.
And what's an MMC? I don't get it. What's that all about? I don't know. Did I time these things? I don't know what timing. You know, to this day, my studio is all timed up so that, you know, you hit play and everything starts at the same time. But that took me the longest time. I mean, I think that of all the technologies that are out there, sequencing the time, what's that? That runs on MTC, right? The time code runs on MTC.
MIDI time? Well, yeah.
Yeah, and then MMC is the ability to like hit a button and send that in, right? So you got to read MMC and you got to send MTC. For the longest time, I just ignored that technology. You know, just hit a button and hope something else in the studio would come on.
I'm actually just really thankful that I bypassed all of this, you know, like protocol-based stuff and just do everything all in one roof. I just waited for the, you know, CPU-based stuff to just catch up over 15 long years.
It's still really helpful to think about that old way of doing things, just getting a nice model, even if it's an unnecessary model of how things are really arranged in the system that you're working with, just having a model as opposed to treating it as sort of an amorphous blob that makes music, right? You know, and it's a helpful model, I think. That
yeah, you still need to know those
analogies. Technologies. Yeah.
What did you say, Ian?
Oh, just knowing those analogies is really helpful, even when you're doing stuff in Renoise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, somebody in the chat room just mentioned Notator. Oh my God, I haven't thought about Notator since this very second.
I remember the first time I saw Notator. Like you look at it. Cubase, you could sort of get some. You could look at it, and visually, you'd sort of, oh, okay, I see it scrolling that way. And when the line reaches that horizontal bar, then that kind of music plays, and you can kind of visually conceive it. But Notator was like, what is this? What's going on? You have no idea about what. Talk about, what is it? UX, UI design. It's like user experience that hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at screenshots of this, it's like
it's a nightmare.
Like a debug menu from a Game Boy game.
You need a college course for Notator. You know, it's like, I graduated college, I'm going to get into DAWs, and somebody hands you Notator, and you go, let me sign up for college.
Yeah, for some reason, all of the other that I can remember of those early DAWs, and I guess others may need to correct me if I'm wrong here, but all of the DAWs, including the early trackers, they all at least had some kind of, visually, they weren't that difficult to understand. I mean, a tracker, any musician could look at a tracker and work out, okay, so it's like a pianola roll, and that's scrolling that way, and when you see C, D, E, that plays a C, D, E there, and it's got a little 3 there, which must be instrument 3, okay, I get it. And then, of course, the horizontal doors with going sideways, but Notator, yeah, I mean, you'd be better off with like a Roland MC50 or something. You remember those old hardware MIDI sequences?
Oh yeah. Oh,
with
man.
no display.
Just like a tiny little two-line LED display. And
I worked at a guitar store when those were big, and it was my first experience in a sales job, and I really hated it. I'm not good at sales, and the store was below, and then upstairs we'd have this like attic full of equipment, and we'd have these training classes, and it was the worst way to learn music software or music hardware, is because it was from a sales perspective, so everything was based off of like the presets and the demos and just enough to show a demo and it was basically like a magic trick with hardware, because they didn't show you how it worked, they just show you how to do this cool little magic trick. But I wanted to know how it worked, so I would ask questions, and I would annoy the hell out of the guy who was running the whole thing, because I would go, well, how do you do this one thing? And if you wanted to sequence drums and you wanted to get them in sequence with the MIDI notes that are in there, how do you do that? And are those on 2 different tracks? And he doesn't know any of that stuff. He just knows how to do this 1, 2, 3 sleight of hand move, and some lady in her 60s will buy it for her kid. That was his whole approach. And so it was so annoying. But anyway, when that thing came out, that was like Houdini in a box. Because you could just like put a disc in it of pre-created things, and all your keyboards that were hooked up to it would start playing all the different parts. It was like an orchestra of keyboards with a diskette, and they just loved the idea of selling that. They were finally, I got fired. I just flat out got fired. I hated that job. They deserved to fire me. Oh my God. That's the worst way to learn a hardware, is through a sales pitch or a sales technique. Don't do it. I don't recommend it.
What were your guys' initial thoughts when General MIDI arrived on the scene?
It had arrived, and I didn't even know it for quite a while.
Okay.
I found that General MIDI single-handedly changed the definition of the word MIDI for 99% of the public. Like, people associate, like when they say it's MIDI, it's obviously they're talking about a general MIDI that they downloaded off of the World Wide Web, and they're playing through their Sound Blaster 16.
Yeah.
And throughout like my contracting career, that would be kind of a point of feedback. They would say it's like sounds a little bit MIDI-ish, and that was just like a horrible slam on your song. That meant like it had no expression, horrible mixing.
Yeah, I'm sure that branding and marketability wasn't their primary concern when they created General MIDI, but naming it General MIDI was kind of like, Nintendo naming the successor of the Wii U. It's like just like so confusing. It's like, as you said, Ian, there was people who didn't really understand, thought that MIDI was just this kind of really cheesy sounding collection of tubas and oboes and kind of, like who uses a tuba from this kind of Roland MT32 or Roland Sound Canvas or something like that. It just sounded so bad. And,
don't forget goblins.
Goblins.
I remember that saying, no, that's not, I was explaining to a friend once, that's not MIDI. And I played him like, what was it, KLF? You remember The White Room by KLF?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you don't? The very, very early, some very early 90s techno.
Yeah.
Like, that's not MIDI, this is MIDI. Because KLF, they used all those old Akai S950, S800, those early samplers.
Yeah.
All running through. It might have been Notator, or it might have been Cubase, I guess.
I'm going to have nightmares about Notator tonight.
Yeah.
Matt M in the chat room loved it. He did all kinds of stuff. It scared me.
Yeah, people who could use it could really use it, and apparently, you know, the timing of Notator was incredibly solid, and I just kind of just remember you just look in awe at this funny thing with these numbers moving, and you have no visual representation. There are these little kind of sort of VU meters matching the MIDI signals that would pump up and down to the beat, but that was kind of it.
I just remembered how I discovered MIDI. It was on a Roland, no, it was a Fender Rhodes keyboard. They built, I don't know if it couldn't have been college. It had to have been after, I don't know where I was, but somebody had built a bar that went across the keyboard, the keys, and when you'd push down a key, it wasn't touching it anymore, and it would send a signal out this bar. It was like a MIDI bar for an analog keyboard.
MIDI bar.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember what it was, but anyway, so it was amazing because you could push in a note and that would send a signal, and the guy who hooked it up was playing. The Rhodes piano wasn't plugged into an amplifier as you have to have. Instead, it was plugged in to this bar was plugged into a keyboard, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was the Korg keyboard that had the joystick. What was that one called?
That's called the
Trinity.
No.
Not. It was way before Trinity. It was
DW something thousand. DW8000s?
Was it? No, I don't remember having numbers, but we'll figure it out later. But anyway, so he's playing. Whatever. It had to have MIDI, so I don't know if this one had MIDI, but I'm pretty sure because at the time I was pretty much in love with that synthesizer, and it was all sample-based. That synthesizer was one of the earliest sample-based synthesizers. Anyway, so he's playing the Fender Rhodes, and that synthesizer's going off, and my mind just went. I was like, "Holy cow! What are you doing?" Amazing. And then he plugged the keyboard into an amp. I remember the other thing he did is he had a pair of Bose 901 speakers that the speaker wires were plugged into an electric plug, and he just plugged it into a wall to show that they could take the voltage.
Wow.
So what
was a weird day.
What were your what were our? So we've talked about like Logic being a bit confusing and all that, but what were some good memories that you guys have with the early DAWs? Were there any that really? I mentioned for me it was Music X, but what about you guys? Were there DAWs in the early days that you would love to go back to again if you had the opportunity?
Nope.
Good.
Okay.
Well, I love the combination of Ableton and Renoise. Like that's really getting it done for me these days. So I don't think there's anything I, would want to go back to. Impulse Tracker is still great. Probably the thing that like jumped me into like kind of a modern sound that was way like a next level above Impulse Tracker was Buzz. I think you mentioned that, Alex, as like it could actually do all the DAW stuff if you were so inclined. Enormous samples and multi-tracking. You weren't going to get any sort of graphics out of it, but it was capable of doing all that stuff. So I loved using Buzz. That's what I was using alongside Logic, and I would just, whenever I had an idea for a song, I would just open up Buzz and bang it out. And then when I felt like torturing myself, I'd try and learn Logic again. Sorry to bring it back to being negative about Logic. So, yeah, but Buzz was great.
Well, you're going to have that again, Ian, because the Renoise team are developing Redux, which is the Renoise sampler as a VST or AU plugin. So
oh, really?
You can take all of Renoise's sampling capabilities and actually use it as a plugin in your beloved Logic. So you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, I've used Rewire to have, I guess it was, I forget which was controlling which, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, if Ableton is a slave and a Rewire, you lose a lot of functionality, but if Ableton is the master, it holds on to everything. I don't know if that helps you remember which one was which.
I wasn't doing any of the Ableton fun live stuff. It was just playing back tracks, so could easily have been the slave.
But I have a good answer for what Alex is saying, because I thought I wanted to bring this up, and your question actually gives me the opportunity. So Cubase was my primary DAW for a very, very long time. Very long time. And, it's set up like a board, so I knew I could reach and get my EQs for a channel, or I could do something. So it's very, very similar to the analog feel. But for some reason, working with a mouse on that was very time-consuming, and I just didn't like that tactile feel of not being able to actually reach up and touch some hardware and using a mouse to do the same thing. And so when Ableton came along, I checked it out, and it just didn't make any sense to me. And it's almost like my brain had to mature to the user interface that Ableton had created. And so about Ableton 4, I checked it out again for like the 4th time, because I would still check it out every time they come out with something. And all of a sudden, it just clicked. My brain said, why am I doing an analog outboard kind of feel with a DAW? Ableton said, no, this is the best way to work with, in my opinion. They were saying, this is the best way to work with audio software on a computer, because we aren't touching anything. And so that's, you know, I think your question was, is there something about a DAW that I'd go back to? I just kind of flipped to Ableton and have stayed there ever since, and just absolutely love it because it doesn't try to be a software version of an SSL board or something, you know.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, the whole paradigm with starting on music software that tries to make musicians feel comfortable by it being an analogy of hardware. You know, in the modern, depending on your heritage in music production, you know, that could be completely irrelevant to you. Or it could be, you know, if you're a musician who's only ever used analog stuff and or hardware stuff, and you're kind of getting into it now, that kind of thing could be a lifesaver for you as well. I guess maybe for people like me who started with trackers, you know, it was always abstract. It was never related to audio hardware. There was like this mystique about a real hardware mixer, when, you know, all I knew mixing is, doesn't that just mean you just take all the instruments in that tracker channel and lower the volume?
Yeah.
Now I remember when I first found Renoise, it's like, whoa, there's a mixer in here and there are faders. It's like a real hardware mixer.
He's like a real boy.
And kind of, wow, I'm really playing with the big boys now. I've got a mixer. Wow. I can pull down a fader. Wow, look at me.
All you did was open a new can of worms.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, when MIDI, back to your MIDI question, when I had finally figured out that you could take one instrument and hook it into another for MIDI and transfer, and there's your MIDI through. Man, that was it. That was amazing. The jump between '89, when I graduated college, and like '94 was enormous. I wonder if that's like the dawn of digital synths. I mean, would that be considered the, like, I should say, the baby years of digital synths? Was that, because in '87, wasn't it? Wasn't that when the Yamaha, what was that, the TR7, or what was that called, the T7?
The DX7?
Yeah, was that '87 or '86? Because that was really my introduction to digital synthesis.
Just check out when Top Gun came out.
86. I can tell you, it was '86. Unfortunately.
There's
maybe
a really
85, actually. It might have been '85. I take that back. But anyway, so that whole digital age was just mind blowing, and thank God for who's the father of MIDI?
Dave Smith.
Dave Smith. Yeah, thank God for him.
There's a really, really fantastic hour-long broadcast of a talk that Dave Smith did about 6 months ago, where he just reminisces about the very early history of MIDI and his collaborations with the companies in Japan and with the companies in America and Europe to set up the MIDI standard. And he talks about the different kinds of the politics behind what was involved in getting all of these hardware companies together to kind of agree on a standard for musical instruments. Let me just, I'll just see if I can find it and post a link, because it's actually really, if you're into music and you're into DAWs and into the history of it and you're interested, it's a really fascinating video. And Dave Smith is a wonderful guy to listen to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I was all analog synths at that time. Any synthesizer I messed with was analog. And Sequential Circuits, which was Dave Smith's company, I think it was the Prophet 5 that had MIDI. And I was like, oh, that's pretty amazing stuff. I don't understand this. This is crazy. And then like 5 or 6 years later, then it all started to kind of click later. But now we got OSC today. So there's a whole discussion, is OSC versus MIDI. You know, it goes to show you that Dave Smith, and it was a group of guys who did this MIDI idea, but he kind of like was the main dude in that whole thing, if my understanding is correct, and please correct me where I'm wrong. But they did such a great job of establishing something that here we are in 2014 still using it. That's really a testament to how well thought out MIDI was in the first place. And I kind of wonder, even though OSC has all of these fantastic capabilities, and I spend, trust me, I spend probably 3 days a week in OSC because of products that we have here. But there's part of me that wonders, you know, MIDI already handled that. MIDI already did that. So that's an interesting discussion, right? OSC versus MIDI. And
I found the video. I posted it in our chat room. If you're listening to this on a podcast, if you search on YouTube for CCRMA Colloquium Dave Smith Instruments, you'll find it's an hour-long talk just with Dave Smith, talking all about the history of MIDI, basically, and also the progression from analog to hardware, back to virtual analog, back to real analog again. It's a really very worthwhile watch if you're into music production.
I'm going to add another one, VintageSynth.com, if you want to look at the history of MIDI and synthesizers. I just found that the Prophet 600 was the first one that had MIDI. I had the Prophet 5, and the Prophet 600 came out, and I had to. That's when I was like, oh my God, they're taking the same keyboard that I already have, and they're making some amazing things with it. So, yeah, that's awesome. I got it. So Dave Smith, good job. Sequential Circuits, Dave Smith, the group that created MIDI. So back to DAWs. Let's talk about Pro Tools. You guys want to do that? Or would you rather not?
It's kind of funny. I think none of us are Pro Tools users here, are we?
No, and I actually evangelize against it. I got to be honest, but they'll never be a sponsor of this show. But
why against it? What is it? I mean,
that's pretty extreme.
Yeah, I do. I evangelize against it because it's like, for instance, if you want to do 5.1 in Pro Tools, you got to spend quite a few $1,000s. That's not smart. Their business. Yeah. What'd you say?
It's their greed that bugs you.
Well, I loved the idea of them coming through the studio. So when I graduated college, I ended up being a studio musician, and I worked in a studio. And because I had just at the end of college started getting introduced to all these softwares and ADAT and all that, when I showed up being a young gun at a new studio on staff. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny, but I won't go into that. So I kind of went through and said, hey, there are all kinds of things that you could do to make this more efficient. You know, have you heard of ADATs? Those are pretty amazing, and there's all these softwares that are out there. And this was right before Pro Tools kind of did this campaign of showing up at studios with their software to do the same thing. And I was getting into Cubase. So deep in my DNA, I have this like, you should try Cubase, and then Pro Tools shows up and goes, here's Pro Tools, and everybody went to Pro Tools. I'm like, you bastards!
Wait a minute.
You sons of bitches!
Wait a minute. Can you just elaborate the history there? So the Pro Tools, was it Avid? Was that their approach? Because I've always wondered why it is that the big pop mixers, like Dave Pensato and all those guys. I've always wondered why it is that they're all Pro Tools users. Can you just elaborate on that history there?
Well, I can't because I was only as a side. I was a passenger in the car.
Okay.
But the truth, my understanding, at least the studio where I was at, is they had a rep that came, whoever the company was that owned it, I don't even know. But they just came through and said, you should check out Pro Tools and you should do it. And studios went crazy. They included hardware, obviously a computer that would hook into your board, and basically would send the tracks, boards. This could get very long, so let me make it as short as possible. So a recording, the difference between a recording console and a mixing console, which a lot of people don't understand, is that a recording console has outs on every channel, where a mixing console does not. So you can bring in on one and send on one at the same time. And so through a computer and an interface, Pro Tools had given people the capabilities to come in on one and send out on one into a computer or through their interface or whatever it was. I don't really know the architecture, so correct me where I'm wrong. But they would, but then you had Pro Tools working that way. Now Cubase did not have that, so you had a computer and you had to bring over the tracks and you had to import them somehow and then work on it. So, even though they were at the same time, and there was probably other DAWs that were at the same time as well, I was pushing for Cubase. And so, rightfully so, Pro Tools had created basically an easier, created less a barrier to entry to use their product. And studios jumped on it. And they weren't, their pricing wasn't bad. The pricing scheme of Pro Tools went crazy much later. So, it was basically just a favoritism thing, and I was a young, kind of opinionated guy. You know how we are when we're younger. And I wasn't crazy about Pro Tools. Now, to this day, I have Pro Tools LE in my studio because some people who will use my mixing room they'll bring in a Pro Tools mix and they need to use it. And and I say, I'm really sorry, I don't have anything, Pro Tools HD or whatever they're at now. It's like HDX or something, because it's too expensive. I've got plenty of Mo2 hardware. I've got some hardware made by other companies that I think is fine, that sounds good. And Pro Tools tied themselves, in my opinion, too closely to hardware and forced you to spend a lot of money for the same features that you could get in a much cheaper alternative. And I think that's why in game audio we have so many people who aren't using Pro Tools. You show up in a studio. There's two different environments there, right? You got the studio guys who have the money, whether they're professional studios or game audio guys who came out of college, and they go, we need a Pro Tools rig. I learned Pro Tools in college. We need to do Pro Tools. And then somebody invests all that money into it. Then somebody else shows up later and goes, here's a Mo2 Cubase solution, which is much cheaper and sounds just as good. And they go, well, I've already spent all this money on Pro Tools.
Yeah, it's a brilliant strategy for them.
Yeah,
lock in. Yeah,
they locked them in, and it's because they were kind of first to market, if you will. And now all these major studios, like I go down to Westlake Studios and I work there, and what do they got? They got an SSL board, and Pro Tools, and I'm like, crap. So you can't get away from learning Pro Tools.
Right. It's kind of like I guess it's kind of like the early days of Office software with Microsoft Word and Excel. But yeah, that's interesting because I've always wondered why it was. I knew there must have been some historical reason why it was that Pro Tools at some stage became the sort of the undisputed mainstay of at least pop music recording, and basically Pro Tools and Waves plugins, right? And
Waves, I discovered Waves way later. I don't know if they were at the same time, but again, I stayed out of the Pro Tools world, so maybe they were in unison. I really don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, Waves plugins, I mean, they sound great, but you wonder, there's so many fantastic options out there that are priced less, sound better, sound the same, whatever. There's just a whole market, a whole world of wonderful plugins from developers all around the world. And yet still, when you watch some of these interviews with these really fantastic, top-level, world-class mixers in the pop music realm, they're all basically, Pro Tools and Waves. It's really, or Stephen Slate these days. Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up buying, I will say, though, that Avid put out, well, Avid's in financial kind of a mess right now.
While we're on DAW history, this is history from like 6 months ago, but didn't something really nasty, didn't they have to what did they sell off Pro Tools brand or something? Or
they got kicked off the stock market, as my understanding.
That's right.
That's not a good sign.
That's not a good sign, is it? No.
I think that finally attrition happens. You've set up, from a business mind, and I'm no MBA or anything, but you set up a paradigm in which you sell your software and hardware, and every year, cheaper software and hardware comes out. Now you've set a price, but they've added some features, so you need to add those features, but your price is already super high. So now when you ask somebody to get those features from you, you have to now sell that at a cheaper price than you would given your price structure, which is ridiculously expensive in the first place. And so I think what they did is they set margins higher than they could achieve to stay in competition with DAWs that were coming out with features that they didn't have. It's really quite disappointing when you think about Pro Tools LE, and again, correct me where I'm wrong, please do. If you hate what I'm saying, please send your emails to alexmay@winningblimp.com.
Yes.
So,
I'll just write back re-noise.
I'll say Ableton. It's not going to do you any good. So, so what happened is I feel that they just priced themselves out of market by being too greedy early, and Ian, identified that right away, which just adds to my dislike of Pro Tools. Do I know Pro Tools? Of course I do. Can I go quickly in Pro Tools? Of course I can. You can't get away from Pro Tools. Do I like Pro Tools? Hell no. If I can talk somebody out of it, I will. But to pay Avid a positive, to give them a solid, I bought the 11 rack hardware piece. It's down here, that's why I looked over. And you should see my live room. It is plastered with amplifiers, from Voxes to old customs to, I got a 62 custom bass with all the tuck and roll, which looks gorgeous, to my orange amp collection, and then the 11 rack I plug into almost every day. And I do not like fake amplifier sounds. I love my GP100, but the worst thing it does is that Cosm amp modeling, which they were one of the first to do amp modeling. But the 11 rack has some horrible presets. Don't get me wrong. You got to find them. But you hit. They have one, and also I got an 11 rack when it first came out because you had to have a dongle to play to use Pro Tools, and I didn't have an iLock, which I do now. And so my dongle for Pro Tools was this 11 rack, and they have this one setting. I think it's called E4 on the original, because I've never upgraded the iOS or the OS, excuse me. And it's called Black Hat. And if you want to sound like Jimmy Page, even though I think they identified it to sound like Slash from Guns N' Roses, I think that's why they call it Black Hat. But I play along with almost every. When I get in the mood to play, I'll play a bunch of I'll put Led Zeppelin on, and I'll just play along. And it's like an identical amp setup to what Jimmy Page had going on. So, good job there. That sounds really very realistic. I'm pretty happy with that.
I think it's just bringing it back to DAWs for a second. I think it's interesting these days the direction that DAW development has taken. That we're seeing more of these. I guess what would you call them? Special application style DAWs. Like Live would be one. It does do your sort of standard DAW stuff, but it does something extra. I guess Bitwig would be another.
Yeah.
It does your sort of standard DAW stuff, but it does extra. Renoise is sort of in that category, but it's not a standard DAW. It does lots of other, but these kinds of sort of special application DAWs. Then on the other side, you have the more like the old mainstays, the traditional ones like Cubase and Logic and Pro Tools, kind of just sort of plodding along. And I sort of, I think if you look down the line, you see a lot of the techno guys, obviously live performance guys going into live, obviously, because that's what it excels at. And of course, Renoise is growing slowly but surely with a different kind of user base. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the direction in the future that the old traditional ones like Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, what direction are they going to take to sort of differentiate themselves now in this market of these sort of special special weapons and training kinds of DAWs like Live.
Yeah, well, I've hogged too much of this show. I'm leaving that up to Vince and Ian.
So I need to weigh in on that. Like, I don't know, Alex, you brought up an interesting point of like what will be the next thing that will kind of capture some more of the space or make its own space. I think there's actually a big gap in like digital music making when it comes to rapidly sketching things out, and like I would love to see something that focuses more on being like a sketch-oriented DAW that isn't all about like post-production and perfecting a mix, but more of just the speed and ease of use for composition.
Like GarageBand?
Maybe. I've never used GarageBand, but just something that once you get the hang of it, you can be really fast with it, and maybe it gets touched up elsewhere, but it's something that you could use to sketch out ideas a lot faster than you could with the full-featured DAWs.
I think to a certain extent, Logic is trying to attack that direction. You look at the direction that Logic's developed over the last few versions, and there's sort of a lot of the pro users are complaining that it's looking and feeling more and more like GarageBand. But I think the idea is that yes, you can do your score notation. Yes, you can do your proper, full big deal kind of production. However, if you're just wanting to, if you just wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with this melody in your head and you just want to slam it in, they're trying to make it easier and easier to just, okay, whirly piano, drum kit. They've got this automatic drummer now that you just set going. You can just play to it. You've got amp models there. You just slam in your ideas, save, and go back to bed. Then in the morning, then you go in and sort of, you tweak things and you get into the production. So I think Logic is trying to go for that direction.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm liking Logic more and more. I've got Logic 10, and that's my go-to for 5.1 mixes because unfortunately Ableton's not doing that yet. But you guys were talking about recording something as quickly as possible. I just use my iPhone. Do you guys do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean that's not a bad thing, I mean, I find myself wishing that, the iPad and the iPhone, something that's like a real modern evolution of the Porta Studio from back in the day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I want. And there are definitely some apps that are out there that are really cool, but and it seems like I want something that's a little bit more than just the really cool recording apps that they've got. I think there actually is a Porta Studio recording app. But also not necessarily the big crazy DAW that's going to be living on our desktop. Something that's in between those two things that provides a really robust sketchbook. Not just recording ideas, but really creating an idea.
Yeah.
I'd be all over that.
Yeah. There's got to be a solution. I was just looking for, while I was looking distracted, I apologize, I was listening. I watched a video on maybe it's been 3 or 4 years about, it was Peter Gabriel's studio, and he's not even in the video, at least I don't remember, but all of the studio engineers and everything are in there, and it was amazing what they do so that he can walk into a room and just start playing. One thing he did in that video that I do out in the live room is that he hung a, you can get a Casio keyboard that has red lights under the keys, and he hangs it from the ceiling, and I do the same thing, although it's not there right now, but I need to hang it back up. And so when I walk in and I just start playing something, I just hit record and start playing it like in the middle of the night. I can go back to bed and it records it. And then if I don't remember what it is in the morning, I can hit play on the MIDI and just push it to that Casio, and all the notes will light up and show me what I played.
Wow, that's nice.
It's a super cheap keyboard. It's like $100 maybe. And I've used it a few times. It saved my bacon a few times. So that's pretty cool to be able to just kind of... Because isn't that the truth? Don't you want to separate yourself from the technology of music and just be in the spirit of the instrument? Because those are two different mindsets for me. And if one starts to bleed into the other too much, if I start to be creative when I'm supposed to be doing a mix, I mean, doing mixes is very creative, but if I feel like writing something creatively while I'm doing a mix, then I'm ruining my attitude of doing a mix. And if I'm wanting to record something and all I can think about is did the MIDI hook up or did I hit the record button or something like that, then I start to get too far away. I mean, those are pretty standard. You got to think of those things. But if I run into any computer problem while I hit record, if I notice something doesn't work, then yeah, the mood is gone. And so I've got the control room here and the live room there to kind of separate. Do you guys do the same thing?
I tend to find I find Renoise kind of like the difference between using a standard text editor and using Vim. It's sort of it's so efficient that it's my sketchbook. It's just kind of you just do it all on the keyboard, like the QWERTY keyboard if you want, and you just kind of slam it in real quick and you're done. And being that everything in the whole song is all laid out right in front of you, nothing is nested inside any kind of clips or anything. It's all right there. You just scroll across it. I don't ever find that issue where, what did I play again? And you got to double click there and like staring at this piano roll. Okay, so there's a C there, and there's a, I just find it so quick that it functions just like a sketchbook for myself. But I'm really odd.
No, I'm the same. We can both be odd together because I do all my sketching in Renoise as well because it is the fastest thing. It has the most. I think it has really good abstractions, and you can ignore the details when you first get started. That's kind of a big difference. Like the MIDI world tends to focus a lot on the details of drawing expression curves and stuff like that, which is just for. Yes, I'm now seeing Vincent's. Is that okay?
That's my sketchbook.
Let me see it.
I do the same thing actually.
There's my sketchbook.
Oh, you are hardcore, buddy.
Okay, mine don't look as nice as that, but I do have a BAF book that I will jot down ideas in. I actually do that more than I do recordings. It forces me to at least distill something down to something like musical, which I think is useful.
I'm no good at sheet music. I can't. I mean, I read music, but it's very slow. You don't want me in your orchestra.
What's the standard these days for orchestrators and people who need to produce sheet music? Is it Sibelius?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's still pretty solidly split between Sibelius and Finale. Actually, especially because of Avid. Because Avid bought Sibelius a while back, and they pissed off a lot of guys with a lack of support behind the Sibelius group for a few years. So I think Sibelius is still really strong in terms of its user base, but Finale continues to be strong for the last few decades.
Didn't one of them kind of like was it Avid who said we're not supporting it anymore, we're going to sell it off, and like the whole user group has risen up to protect it and
I think that was Avid. Yeah, I think that was Avid and Sibelius. Although I remember recently it was more along the lines of users saying, "Okay, Avid, you suck. Hurry up and sell Sibelius so that you can get some real support."
Oh yeah, but then nobody picked it up. Nobody bought it, right?
Right. I don't think it's sold. I think it's still under Avid.
So
That would probably be a good example of like a saturated market. Like everyone who does that would have one of those two things already. So I can't see investors wanting to jump in on that.
Do we?
Plus, you've got to. How many games are you getting access to a real orchestra as opposed to sampled orchestra? And so I don't need sheet music because my computer doesn't need to see it.
Yeah, there's like a dozen people in the world who could probably cover all of that stuff. I'd hate to say it, but
idealistically, we would like to be able to write the sheet music and move forward and pass it on down and have somebody look at it. And I would love to work in that world. And I think the movies, obviously, I should say, I don't think. I mean, the movies are still doing that. But in games, unfortunately, there's such a demand. And given that independent games are so big, and such a growing force, that the big companies have competition from smaller companies and are trying to cut costs, and then the small companies can't afford it in the first place, so they just want you to do a score that's based out of virtual instruments, just make it sound really good. Is it going away? Do you see a future where we don't use, I know this is away from the DAW, but it made me think, is the future in video games going to be one in which we don't use a live orchestra anymore?
I personally hope so, because live orchestras are really great, but man, virtual instruments sound really good, and it would be really cool to have a virtual. My future has virtual instruments running in real time along with the game.
Yeah.
And just getting back to that ultimate in interactivity that we had. Honestly, back in the 90s when people were using MIDI to good effect for their interactive scores.
Yeah.
Even Super Nintendo.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about that sequencing data.
I'm not hearing anybody, when I see reviews, I don't read a review. That's not fair, I don't read reviews. But sometimes I'll read an article in like Game Informer about a game that I know didn't use a real orchestra, and I never see them say, "Oh my God, this thing would be great if they would have just used a real orchestra."
Well, if they mention the music at all, I always
yeah.
To that.
You're making a good point. Yeah, they didn't even talk about it. Oh my God! So is that what the future is? I mean, certainly sample libraries are getting better and better and better, and giving us more exposure to articulation so that we can program them in the way we want. And I don't know. I did a piece. I guess it's probably been a year now since I had to program this Uilleann pipe, but I always worry that I'm not saying that correctly. I think it's Uilleann. But it was very difficult to program it and to get it to sound real, at least to what my ear thought was real. And then when I got done, I started wondering, can a Uilleann pipe even play the way I just made that thing play? But nobody said anything. So even myself, because what you're going for is the aesthetic of a Uilleann pipe. You're not going for the actual specific performance that a Uilleann pipe can produce. So if you hit the aesthetic, then nobody worries about the performance, except for that one Uilleann piper who has your game and says, "I could never do that. That thing is crap," and then they get on their blog about it. But I never saw any complaints. So if we don't have to even worry about, I mean, obviously you can't take a double bass and run them up in the, in the violin range and go, yeah, they can pull that off. There are certain limitations, of course, but if we keep in our limitations and we hit the aesthetic and the sample library sounds good enough, I can see game companies saying, I'm not going to shell out the money for a full orchestra because I know it can be achieved without it, and I've heard it in other games.
Yeah, full orchestra is really tough.
Well, it's also a question of talent and audio capability. I mean, like when I say that the future is going to have this awesome technology, there needs to be people that are going to be making that awesome technology and supporting that and delivering that type of music, because it's no longer just music data. It's awesome heuristics and algorithms for your players and your virtual performers in this virtual orchestra. And actually, there's even now there are a lot of people that would say that the cost in terms of saving time on music by just going to an outside music coordinator that has a relationship with a particular orchestra in, say, Central Europe or something, and just getting that soundtrack recorded, and boom, that time saved not having to make this fiddly MIDI data sound really good.
That's really interesting because
that fantastic wave data that's just delivered to you.
That's interesting because I remember when Gerard was on, and I asked him that specific question: is that when you're working with a real orchestra, does it save you time or is it extra time? And his answer really surprised me. He said that, well, actually, before the studio will approve the budget for a real orchestral recording, they want to hear the music, okay? But he said at that point it needs to be really, really super polished and convincing at that point already. Then, if it sounds really good and engaging enough, then they'll say, okay, we'll let you record it with a real musician. So it's kind of double the work, he said.
Well, it depends on also what type of thing you're doing. There's sometimes it's a little tough to sequence particular passages. On the other hand, there are some really interesting libraries that are like, oh, we got aleatoric string run here, and we're just going to put that aleatoric string run in there. And you give it to an orchestra, it actually sounds significantly better than that thing that you dropped in from that library. So in terms of getting it past the producers and getting it approved, it has to be up to a certain level of polish. It's nice that some producers out there do appreciate and can actually look forward to what that level might be, what that level could be. And some guys, well, they actually do need to have it 99% there. They won't say they won't go any further unless it's there.
Brian DiDomenico in the chat room just alluded to that, and he made a really good point that I didn't think about. He said that Seth MacFarlane made a stand on mock-ups this year in an article. Brian thinks this is how it went. He said, saying that there is too much demand for composers' demos to be too lifelike. He said, when you hire John Williams, you get a few piano recordings of some themes. So does the game industry not trust the musicians to be able to create something out of their piano demos? Are they saying, we want to see the creation up front? I mean, investors do that. Hey, we invest in my company. They say, we want to see you already making revenue before we invest in our company. Is that the same thing that producers are saying, is we already want to see what the end product's going to sound like, because we don't trust that with just piano demos you're going to be able to pull off what you say you're going to pull off?
Yeah, I think it's in that case, John Williams obviously has a reputation and has a huge pedigree. However, if you're just starting, or this is your first project for this client, if the client's not especially musical and they're unable to extrapolate from this simple scratchy piano recording of a theme to the big grand epic orchestral requiem, if they're unable to sort of make those extrapolations musically in their head, then it's going to be really challenging for them to sort of trust you. It's like, well, I think it sounds nice on a piano, but is it going to sound good on an orchestra? I don't really know, because I'm not, I don't have the ability to visualize what this theme will sound like when it's properly orchestrated. However, if it's John Williams, you might think, well, I don't know how to visualize how it sounds, but hey, you did Indiana Jones and you did Star Wars, so you've got to be doing something, right?
Yeah, it's definitely tough for those game producers. I know that for this one project that I'm currently doing, This I actually wrote a theme for this dude, and he was like, "Oh, okay, this is kind of interesting, but I'm not sure if this is actually the sound that we want for this." And then I had to explain that, okay, this is a theme that's actually really quite robust, and by robust I mean it can handle these things. And I ended up having to arrange 4 different arrangements. So the first one was piano. The first one was solo winds with a piano accompaniment. The second one was a simple string arrangement, and the third one was a very short, full orchestral mock-up. And then only then did he really get the idea of what this theme was all about. But yeah, I think that's a real case. We've got these game producers that are not necessarily incredibly musically savvy, and that's okay. Hopefully, if you're working with a developer or a publisher, you do have a point person who is pretty musically savvy and can help not just make the ultimate music production decisions, but is a real advocate for you.
I would say, yeah, that's an excellent point. Like that, you can have this theme there, and then in the context of the game, this theme could sound 4 different ways depending on how you arrange it, and it'll have 4 different emotions depending on how you arrange it. And so really the emotional characteristics of the song are all that matter in the game. The theme is kind of a secondary thing. It's nice to have a theme that ties everything together, and it's nice to have a hummable melody for the quality of the song. But it's really can you put the piano sketch alongside gameplay and have it give you the emotional characteristics you want? Probably not. So whenever I do sketch work for seeing what sort of songs fit gameplay, I will do 10-second sketches, but they're full, arrangements of whatever, just to get closer to that. I find that's more useful than a melody or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why software has made it easier on us to mock those things up. And Chase gave a lot of information in the chat room. I didn't want to go without mentioning it because it's something that I think that all people who use orchestral sample libraries do is bring in live musicians. He was kind of talking about that in some of his comments, which I lost because I didn't chat often enough and my window shut down, and when I come back in it erases everything. So yay, technology.
Yeah.
But
Chase makes some really good points.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the whole thing with live musicians is, you're not just bringing live musicians to record this music and have it wrought exactly as you prescribed it on the page. They're part of the music making process overall. They're not just dudes you go out to, even though it's very easy to find services that do exactly that. Hopefully what's going on is, you as a musical force are joining with these other musical forces to really amplify and bring up the music to something that's far greater than what you envisioned in your head.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, it's 7:03, so I think it's about time we got to get going. Keeping our show to an hour.
Time flies.
It's a fun going. Maybe we should keep going.
Well, we can.
I have a dinner thing, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would keep. Well, you guys can keep going. I don't know. Is it the same without me? It's probably.
No, it is not.
Oh man.
It is not. So put your votes in here for Ian being a regular on the show. Just send them to me. Woo. Look, Ian, everybody thinks you're awesome. You should do this all the time. It's amazing. No, I'm not going to show you the results.
Oh wow.
I need some extra tracker support in here, Ian. There's only one of me. We need stereo.
We need to get Alex Brandon in
here. I didn't get a chance to voice any tracker support, but yeah, I still miss my impulse tracker days.
I should see if I can get Jeffrey Lim on the show.
That would be fantastic.
We tried before, didn't we? But he was a little busy.
Well, Alex Brandon's been waiting in the back. Did I say his name right? Alexander.
Yeah, Alex Brandon. Yeah, Siren.
In the back halls of Game Audio Hour Central to be on a show, and I said we had 2 tracker shows so close together we're going to space it out before that. But I really want to get him on here, and he's been so kind and patient. So maybe we should do that. You guys should just run a tracker show and I'll watch it, because other than my very limited experience with with Renoise, I've never done the tracker thing. But anyway, with that, we should hang up. It's 7:05. Great subject, man. My God. The history of DAWs through MIDI, through the future of orchestral music and games. Seriously, why do you go anywhere for game information, game audio information?
Whew.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that was pretty whirlwind.
That was a fun one. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to hang up and compile these videos so people can get them right away. And I'll just see you guys next week.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, chatties. Thanks for being in the chat room. And, my God, I actually had to scroll again this week, which is pretty awesome. I love it. Thanks for coming. Later.
Bye.
Oh. Whoa. Oh, did everyone leave?
I think they left. Are we still? I'm still
Wait a
seeing
minute,
live.
are we still live?
I think we're still live.
Oh man! So we are going to do the stereo tracker show. Let's see. Actually, I am interested in seeing if the IRC guys are still seeing us.
Oh, I can. We're still going.
Oh man, we're still going. We could keep on going.
Kyle forgot to stop the stream.
Oh man. Well,
So,
it's kind of funny because we can keep on going. You know, we went through a lot of stuff, but there's also all these other things that
There he is, he's
we
back.
could have done.